Hi, if you are there, if you're watching this video, please let me know so we can know who we're talking to, who I'm talking to, that I'm not alone here. Please let me know if you are there. I'm going to post this to social media. Let me get the link. Again, folks, if you're there, please let me know so we can get this thing going. Okay. Okay, post it to Facebook. I should actually post it onto Facebook. 1 second. Almost ready, folks. Okay, just posted that to Facebook. And please let me know if you are there with us. Do comment. Let me know who's here. I see some people in the classroom. Let me know. Just comment or something so I know who I'm talking to. It would be very helpful. Don't be shy. Okay. And again, the more you comment, the easier it is for me to engage and to know who I'm talking to and what level to pitch it at. So without much further ado, I'm going to begin this class on Facebook and on YouTube. Good morning, Shelley. How are you? Nice to see you. Pleasure to study with you. Steve Wasserstrom, same here with Wanda. Great to see you. Are you guys still in Florida, Steve? I was wondering if I can't imagine that you went up north during this time. So I'm glad that we're able to connect through the study of Tanya. That's great. Great to have you with us. Don't forget, guys, you can also watch us on YouTube or on Facebook, and we're in both platforms at the same time. So hi, Shelley. Good morning. Great to study with you. Hope that you're doing well. Hope Michael's doing well. Hope everybody's safe. And boy, do we miss you guys. Trying to hang in there through this really weird and interesting time that we're all going through. So I'm going to get started right away. It's 10 o'clock. I'm going to get straight into this. And I want to encourage your comments and questions and feedback and thoughts as we go through this so we can make it more of a meaningful and a interactive experience. It's hard talking to an empty room, talking to a screen. But when I see your comments, it kind of gives me chayas, gives me enthusiasm to be able to, to get into it. Okay. With that, I'm going straight into it, folks, on Tanya. Last week, what we did is, we're going to have one big, massive Kiddush celebration when we are finally back together. This is rough times, and we're really looking forward, Shelley, to that beautiful Kiddush when we all get together again. In good health, God willing. So, Tanya today is a fascinating conversation. What we did last week was the first week that we took Tanya online. So what I did is I made an introduction to Tanya in last week's lesson, which took us from chapter 1 through chapter 22 in one session. The goal of that session was to be able to introduce our online viewers to be able to experience, hi, my brother Uriel from Manhattan. He's now in Monsey. I hear it's snowing by you, and I hope that you can join us in Torah study here as well. We're studying Tanya. So last week we've been studying Tanya every single week for, I don't know how long, maybe 2 years or so. And not even, maybe a year. And what we've done is that every week we go through half a chapter or a chapter orally. So when we moved the platform online last week due to coronavirus, I wanted to give it an opportunity so that our listeners can kind of calibrate and get an understanding and a feel for what Tanya is. If this is your first Tanya session, I highly encourage you to go into our Facebook feed at facebook.com/Jewish Gardens. That's the Chabad of Palm Beach Gardens page on Facebook. And just scroll down till you find the video, which is Tanya of Tuesday of last week. I think it was March 17th is last week, Tuesday, where you can listen to the class, which was a video review of Tanya from chapter 1 through chapter 22, so that today we can get straight back into it, moving along into chapter 23 of Tanya. And I want to welcome our listeners, our viewers for the first time, people that are studying Tanya for the very first time. Shelly, I'm not sure if you've been to a Tanya class before. And Hannah Siegelstein, I don't think you've been to a Tanya class, at least not in person with us. And I want to welcome you all and encourage your questions and participation and thoughts. I do not want to lose you. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So where Tanya chapter 23 is taking us, it's a beautiful, beautiful spiritual place. Really, really beautiful spiritual place. And I'm going to put this in context. The purpose of what Tanya is trying to achieve, it states in the opening page of Tanya, in the introduction page, it says, it quotes a verse from Dvarim, the last book of the Torah, which says, Kikara iveilecha hadavar ma'oid, for the matter is very near to you, beficha, in your mouth, uvilvavcha, and in your heart, la'asai, to do it. It's very easy to be a perfect Jew in thought, speech, and action. That's what it says in the Torah. It's very easy to be a perfect Jew in thought, speech, and action. Remember, there's 613 commandments in the Torah. They are divided into thought, speech, and action. There's only 3 ways that our soul, our spiritual soul, can express itself through our body in this physical world, through either thought, speech, or action. These are our 3 windows, our 3 platforms of expression. Any mitzvah you can possibly think of. Tefillin is an action mitzvah. Torah study is a thinking and a speech mitzvah. Food is an action mitzvah. A mezuzah is an action mitzvah. Loving your fellow like yourself is a thought mitzvah, right? Prayer is a speech mitzvah and mostly a thought mitzvah, a heart mitzvah. So basically, it says in the Torah that it's easy to be a perfect Jew in thought, speech, and action. And the Tanya, the whole premise of Tanya is, really? Since when is it easy to be a perfect Jew on every level on thought, speech, and action? That's basically what the Tanya is coming to solve for us. So we spoke last week about that in detail, but what we are in the middle of doing right now is a shortcut method to be able to do that. And the premise over here that the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, if you want to see a picture of him, if you haven't met the Alter Rebbe before, he's actually my great-grandfather 9 generations ago. Here he is. That's the Alter Rebbe. It's a picture of him. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi is the founder of the Chabad movement, an absolutely brilliant, incredible person. So he founded the Chabad movement. The whole purpose of the Chabad movement is to have a meaningful, rational relationship with God, where we don't do things because we just told to do things. We do things because they actually make sense and have meaning to us. They actually mean something to us, right? There are other groups of Jews that don't need that. They just do what they do because they have to do it. And they're perfectly okay with that. But the more we progress into this dark spiritual exile, the deeper we enter into this exile, further away from Mount Sinai, the more corporal, the more mundane, the more crass we become, the more we need something to sink our teeth in to have a meaningful relationship with God. And that's why the Alter Rebbe began the Chabad movement, to be able to give us something that we can give us more oomph, more energy, more enthusiasm in our spiritual relationship with an abstract God. So in this section of Tanya, chapters 18 through 25, the Alter Rebbe is giving us a shortcut method about how we can come to a state of self-mastery where we are able to express our godly soul instead of our animal soul. We have 2 souls, a godly and an animal soul. To express our godly soul through our thought, speech, and action. And the way that the Alter Rebbe explained it was that each and every one of us has a natural instinct, which is not to defy our godly soul. Our godly soul is a piece of God. And therefore, it cannot defy its connection with God in an overt and outright rejection of God. So if a Jew is typically asked to pledge allegiance to another faith, the Jew will go to extraordinary measures in order to maintain his loyalty to his faith, because a Jew is incapable of rejecting his faith in any manner that is clearly a rejection of his faith. He might eat non-kosher, and he might do other sins because he doesn't feel that he's severing his connection with God. But the moment that a Jew realizes that he's severing his connection with God, that's when he's going to kick in a very, very passionate manner, and he would even give up his life for God. The question is, when do you realize that you're severing your connection with God? And each one of us might be a little bit different in that department. So we all have this natural instinct, which is an inability to sever our connection entirely with God. Now, what the Alter Rebbe did in the previous two, he explained that the concept of Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad introduces us to the doctrine of Hashem Echad, of God's oneness, God's unity. God's unity means not only that God is the only God. Not only does it mean that God is the only God and that Mickey Mouse or Zeus or Jupiter or whatever are not gods as well, because that's pretty obvious. There's only one creator, God, master of the universe, designer. The doctrine of God's unity, as explained in the Tanya, is that not only are there no other gods before him, but nothing else exists before him. The only entity that exists is only God. There's nothing else that exists. How then is it possible for us to have a sense of separation from God? How is it possible that we live in a world where we don't see the apparent connection with God? If God is the only thing that exists, then why don't we see him? The answer is because God hides himself. The answer is because God hides himself behind a doctrine called Tzimtzum. So God literally hides himself so that we don't see him. He creates this sort of a smoke screen, a mirage, to be able to hide himself. And that's what we call Tzimtzum. God's contracting himself as a one-way mirror. So he can see us, but we can't see him. And this magnificent metaphor that God uses in the Torah to describe this dynamic is the metaphor of creation through a voice-activated interface. That God creates the world through speech, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The fact that the world was created through the medium of speech serves as a very, very powerful metaphor. And the reason why it serves as a powerful metaphor is because when someone speaks a concept, when you speak an idea, that idea is united with yourself. It's one with you. And at least before you spoke the idea, before the idea actually was spoken, the idea was one with yourself and not separate from you in any way. When a human being speaks out a word, the word becomes separate from the speaker. But when God speaks, because there is no outside to God, God is everything. There is no outside to God. Nothing can possibly be outside of God. There is no such thing as an outside when it comes to God, who is everything and all of existence. Therefore, everything that God speaks is still incorporated within God's oneness. The problem is that when we look at how God creates, the speech of God is perceived to us as separate from God because of the doctrine of Tzimtzum, because of God contracting him and hiding himself. Therefore, the power of God seems to leave outside of God and to create something outside of himself. But from God's perspective, there is no outside to God, and the energy never left outside of God. So from God's perspective, everything is incorporated within himself. But from our perspective, it seems that we, who are created beings, are outside of God, just like a spoken word leaves the mouth of the speaker. So the way the human metaphor of speech works, we think that we are outside of God. But from God's speech, there is no outside to God, and therefore nothing ever leaves God. So it's only our distorted sense of reality that gives us the notion that we are outside of God, when in reality, we are one with God always and at all times. Now, it's with this introduction that the Alter Rebbe introduces chapter 23 by telling us a magnificent concept that when we connect, when we do a mitzvah, what we're doing is that we are connecting with the will of God. The will of God, which is the ultimate purpose of all of creation. Folks, if I'm losing you here, please let me know. Do give me some comments and thoughts, so I know that so I know that you're still with me. That I'm not going too deep. It's very difficult teaching an abstract and deep concept to a screen. So if you could let me know that you're capturing what I'm getting or not, or you have questions, it would be very helpful for me to be able to gauge my speech and the speed or the depth. So back to this, the notion. So God creates the world, but when God creates the world, it's for a purpose. The reason that God created the world is because He wanted the fulfillment of Torah and Mitzvahs. There's a will, and then there's an inner will. So, for example, when I build a house, what's my goal? My goal is to be able to have a beautiful place for my family to relax and be safe and secure. That's the inner will of my building a home. But then there's an outer will. The outer will is for the architect to come in, and the outer will is for me to pay the architect, and for the sheetrock people to come in, and for the door people, and for the electrician and the plumbers. The electrician and the plumbers are not the true desire in my building of the home. They are the means to the ends. The ultimate desire is for everybody to leave and just to be able to be left alone with my family in a place that's safe, comfortable, and secure in my own home. So the true inner will of the construction of the home is that we should have a place to live comfortably as a family. But then there's an external will, which is to bring in electricians and plumbers and architects and kitchen designers to be able to reach the inner will. So too when God creates the world. God creates the world in a way where the inner will of creation was, the ultimate purpose of creation was that we should do a mitzvah and we should study Torah in this world. That's it. But to get to that will, He needed to create trees and flowers and people and houses and countries and oceans and animals and birds and yada, yada, yada. So everything else is external will, but the true inner will of God is that we should fulfill the Torah and Mitzvahs. So when we, the Jew, has an opportunity, when I, the Jew, have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, if I can take a mezuzah and put it on my door, then what I'm doing with that mezuzah is that I'm connecting with God's true will. That's what I'm doing. I'm connecting with God's true will. And when I'm connecting with God's true will, I'm experiencing the most extraordinary connection with God Almighty. Realizing that God is everywhere. Realizing that the doctrine of God's unity means not that there's no other gods alone, because that's obvious, but God's unity means that the only thing that exists is God, that nothing exists outside of God. We realize that God is everywhere. And then whenever we do a mitzvah, which is the will of God, we are connecting with God's essence. Now, the moment we've come to that realization that a mitzvah connects us with God's essence, we now are going to be able to engage our natural instinct, which is not to be separated from not to sever our connection with God. You see, under normal circumstances, a Jew thinks that the only time that he'll engage extraordinary measures is if his connection with God is at stake. And that is, if he's asked to bow down to an idol. Such a Jew would say, no, I'm not going to bow down to another God. I will only remain loyal to God. But what we've just realized in chapter 23 of Tanya is that every single mitzvah that we do is essentially an extraordinary connection formed between the Jew, who's a creation, and God, who's the creator of the universe, because we're able to connect with the will of God. And the moment you've connected with the will of God, you've become one with God Himself. And therefore, in the same way that a Jew is willing to exhibit extraordinary commitment, not to forsake or sever his connection with God in a life or death scenario, so too we begin to realize, it starts to dawn upon us, that the same devotion we will also exhibit when it comes to doing any one of the 613 commandments, because every single one of the 613 commandments is an extraordinary union, a wondrous union between me and God. Because where else can I find God's essence, God's deepest desire? The only place I can find God's essence is in the mitzvahs, because that's God's will. You and your will is like a deep, deep, deep part of yourself. Your desire is a deep part of yourself. It's not like something external to yourself. What you want, your desire, the deep soul essence within yourself. So too with God. When God tells us what he wants and we do what he wants, we're connecting with God's desire. We're thus connecting with God's essence. And that's that's a communion that we don't want to sever. And in the same way that we'll exhibit great self-sacrifice in order to remain loyal and not to break the connection with God Almighty when it comes to a life or death scenario, so too we begin to realize that we will want to remain loyal and devoted to God when it comes to every single mitzvah, which is a union with God. In the words of the Tanya, chapter 23, he compares it to a horse and a rider, to a chariot and a rider. I guess it's like a car and a driver in today's analogy. When you get into a car, you and your car, when you're driving, you're like one thing. You're like a horse and a rider. You're one. You're united. You become just one thing. The car doesn't normally betray or defy the will of the driver. It does exactly what the driver tells them to do. If you turn your steering wheel to the right and the wheels turn to the left, you've got problems. That's not supposed to happen. You turn the steering wheel to the right and the car beautifully curves to the right and to the left, and it's beautiful. It's seamless. It's a seamless integration. Just like the union between the car and the driver, so too is the union between the Jew and the will of God. When we do a mitzvah, we are connecting the physical part of our body that's doing the mitzvah, the arm that lays the fill-in, the digestive system that eats the kosher food, the lips that are reciting kind words of kindness to another person, the legs that are walking to shul. Whatever part of your body is doing the mitzvah is like a horse and a rider, is like a car and a driver, where the will of God is completely enmeshed together with the physical limb of the body that is fulfilling that mitzvah, and the power of the soul and the soul which is engaged in that mitzvah. So we are becoming one and united with God during the time that we fulfill the mitzvah. Now, what's extraordinary is that the forefathers and the foremothers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, they were considered chariots of God. They were considered chariots of God. What does that mean? Just like a chariot is in complete submission to the driver of the chariot, just like a car is in complete submission to the driver, the forefathers and foremothers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel, and Leah, they were connected to God with all of their body parts at all times. So when you and I do a mitzvah, like right now, we're studying Torah, right? So our physical bodies are engaged in the study of Torah. My lips, my mind is engaged in Torah study right now. So we're connecting with the will of God at this moment through this part of our reality. Assuming that you're focused on the Torah study and not on something else, your whole mind is focused on Torah study, then right now your whole head is a chariot to the will of God. The difference between us and the forefathers and foremothers is that they were chariots to God in their entirety at all times. What an extraordinary level that they were able to reach. We are able to reach a small portion of that each and every time that we do a mitzvah for the duration of the mitzvah and with that body part. So if you're, let's say, giving charity to the poor, or you're making a donation to the shul, right? Then that money that you're donating, the hand with which you're writing the check, is now a chariot to God's will, but only for the duration of the writing of the check, and only with that body part, with the hand. But the forefathers and foremothers, their uniqueness was that they were chariots to God with all their body entirely at all times. They were complete chariots before God. Then the Tanya carries on to go one step deeper by telling us that Good morning, Tvorachana. Good to have you with us. Welcome to Tanya class, Tanya study with us. So the Tanya chapter 23 then goes one step further to say that beyond the unity that's formed between the Jew and God during the time of a mitzvah, there's an even greater union that's formed when we study Torah. Because when we study Torah, there's a big difference. As opposed to doing a mitzvah, see, when you do a mitzvah, the union between God and the Jew through study of Torah and through doing a mitzvah. See, when you do a mitzvah, you're manifesting the will of God through a physical object. The will of God is not actually in the physical object. The will of God is that God should be, let's say the will of God is that we should eat kosher, right? That we should separate the meat and the milk. So the actual steak is not the will of God. It's a manifestation of the will of God that God wants the meat separated from the milk. But when we come, so it's like we're representative of the will of God. That's when you do a mitzvah. But when you're studying Torah, you're taking the will of God in and of itself, in its raw form, before it's reflected into a physical manifestation. It's the raw will of God. It's the wisdom of God itself, in and of itself. When you're studying Torah, you're connecting with God's essence. And that's why the unity formed between the Jew and God when they study Torah is that they actually become one. As it says in the Zohar, God and his Torah are actually one. When we study Torah, we become one with God because the wisdom of God itself, the will of God in and of itself, becomes part of our brain. And our brain is an inseparable from the wisdom itself. The will of God is just one thing with our brain. As opposed to when we do a mitzvah, which is just a manifestation of the will of God. It's still the will of God, but it's only a physical manifestation of the will of God. And therefore, the unity formed is like two entities working together as one, becoming enmeshed like a horse and a rider, like a driver and a car, where two entities, the driver and the car, are still two separate things. They're just working in tandem. That's what they're doing. They're working in tandem. But when we are studying Torah, the will of God itself in its rawest, purest form becomes one with us, inseparably united with our wisdom, as we learned in Tanya chapter 5, if you recall. And what that causes is a wondrous union between God and the Jew. So we've learned about two levels of unity. The level formed with God, the unity formed with God through the mitzvah, which is a very beautiful level of unity. It's kind of like marriage, where husband and wife become one, but they're still two separate entities. And then there's the next level of unity, which is like having a baby, where when you have a baby, you got mom and dad are in one physical body in the baby. So they literally became one flesh. That's a deeper level of unity, where it's not one and one becoming together. It's just one entity. That's the baby. That's how the unity formed between God and the Jew through the study of Torah. So you begin to realize the extraordinary opportunity that we are given as human beings, as Jewish people, to be able to form a meaningful unity, a meaningful relationship, and even a unity with the master of the universe. No other creation on the face of this earth is able to do this. No one else is given this opportunity to be able to become one with God like a Jew through the mitzvah, and more specifically through the study of Torah. Marty is asking a question. So is the study of Torah more substantive than a mitzvah, which is more fleeting? The answer is yes. That's exactly what chapter 23 is saying. That the unity, from the perspective of unity with God, study of Torah is far more profound of a unity than the unity brought about through the mitzvah. This doesn't mean that we're discrediting or discounting the greatness of a mitzvah. A mitzvah is still an extraordinary bond with God, like a horse and a rider, like a driver and a car. It's an extraordinary unity. It's just not as one as the unity which is formed through Torah study, Marty. So I hope that makes sense to you. Both are extraordinary. But if you have to choose between which, from a perspective of unity, Torah study definitely trumps over mitzvahs, which is a higher form of unity, both of which, however, are still extraordinary opportunities to connect to the master of the universe, what no other creation in the world is able to achieve. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is really saying in this chapter. When he helps us realize that we're now well on the way to self-mastery. Because we all know that if someone put a gun to our heads and said, bow down to an idol, pledge allegiance to another religion, or I'll kill you, we all know that we most likely would give our lives for our faith, because we wouldn't want to sever our connection with God. But when now we realize, based upon the doctrine of God's unity, that God is absolutely everywhere. You don't have to find God in the synagogue. You don't have to go to a yeshiva to find God. God is absolutely everywhere and in everything. You realize that we can connect to God on an incredibly meaningful level each and every time that we do a mitzvah. And that to abandon the opportunity to do a mitzvah is actually a grave insult to God. Think about that. Imagine somebody offers you $1 million. And you say, you know what? Not today. Let me think about it. Maybe in September. Talk to me in September. Let's see. The guy would be like, okay. You don't want it. I'll give it to someone else. God is offering us an opportunity to connect with infinity. 613 different ways, including the study of Torah, every single day. If we were to realize the extraordinary connection with God that happens every single time that we do a mitzvah, it would be far more difficult for us to walk away from the opportunity to do a mitzvah. And that's what Tanya chapter 23 is teaching us. Every single mitzvah is an extraordinary opportunity to connect with God. Don't abandon it. In the same way that we have a natural instinct. Remember, our godly soul is a piece of God. It is one piece with God. It cannot by definition separate from God. You see, many of us think of God as some angry, insecure cop in the sky that's watching us with vengeance, and he's angry with us and he wants to make sure that we don't step out of line, because if you step out of line, I'm going to zap you. That's not the Jew's relationship with God. This is not the Chabad approach to God. God is an organic extension of me. It is who I am, not a rejection of me. Just like patriotism. Think of it maybe like patriotism. Being an American isn't something external from me. I am an American. Yes, America is outside of me. And America makes rules that I have to comply with, taxes and immigration and voting and census and all sorts of interesting laws that surround me. But those laws are not something which I find difficult to comply with, because I'm an American. This is an extension of who I am. It's an organic, it's a privilege to be able to be an American, and to be people line up and they wait decades to be able to become an American, right? It's a gift, it's an opportunity to be an American, and I'm proud of it, right? So I don't see that as something which is some sort of an angry code of conduct that's trying to make my life miserable, as much as it's an opportunity to live in a free and upright society, which is a gift and opportunity for me. More than my connection to being an American is my connection with God. God might be outside of me, at least perceived to be outside of me, but still, I am an extension of God. My godly soul is a piece of God, and by definition, I cannot reject my source, my origin, my power. And therefore, a Jew, by definition, cannot sever his connection with God. The question is, at which point do you realize, does it dawn upon you that you're severing your connection with God? So for most Jews, that happens only when it's in a life or death situation. When somebody puts a gun to their head and he says, convert to Islam or I'll kill you. Bow down to this idol or I'll kill you. At that point, you'll find many Jews, people like Daniel Pearl, the Washington Post journalist who was very secular, who was in Pakistan and was killed for being a Jew. And he said, I was born a Jew and I'm going to die a Jew. And people like Ed Koch, mayor of New York, who might have lived a very, very secular life. But on his tombstone, what does he say? I'm a Jew, I was born a Jew, and I'll die a Jew. He can't sever that connection. He might not have lived as a Jew, but he's going to die as a Jew. And that's a very important element. And many Jews might live with the following notion. I might not live as a Jew, but I will die as a Jew. I was born a Jew, and I'm going to die a Jew. What the Alter Rebbe is teaching us in chapter 23 is that living as a Jew is just as important. Every single time you have the opportunity to study Torah or to do a mitzvah, you have an opportunity to connect with God's essence, and therefore engage all powers to be able to make that happen. In the same way that you would engage your natural instinct to overcome an opportunity, to overcome a request to reject God, so to engage your natural instinct, your natural love for God, your natural love for your origin, to be able to do a mitzvah. And that's the shortcut path to self-mastery. The realization that every single mitzvah is an opportunity to connect with God on a deep and meaningful level, to be able to connect with my essence, with my core, with my powerhouse. And therefore, you'll be able to reach a state of self-mastery, not by the long method, which was earlier in Tanya, the long method, which was a way through meditation and coming up and creating a new love for God within yourself. This is about using the natural love, which is already present inside each and every one of us. It's bequeathed to us by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our forefathers and foremothers. The natural love for God, which we instinctively have when we realize that every single mitzvah is an opportunity to connect with God on a deep and united level. And therefore, walking away from a mitzvah is effectively a rejection of God. That is going to be able to encourage us to be able to reach self-mastery in thought, speech, and action, to be a perfect Jew on every level of this, in all of the 613 mitzvahs, by engaging our natural love instead of having to create a new love through some form of meditation. Dvorah Chana is asking a question. So a mitzvah is a spiritual connection with Hashem in the physical, kind of like bringing his godliness into the physical world. That's exactly right, Dvorah Chana. Whereas Torah is not even a physical thing. Torah is remaining in the spiritual world. When you study Torah, it's a spiritual experience. You're not going through a physical experience. You're going through a spiritual experience. It's not like something hard and fast and tangible. You're studying wisdom. Wisdom is spiritual. And therefore, you're keeping godliness in its rawest form, where it's not expressed in a physical, tangible manner that betrays godliness. It's godliness in its essence, pure form. And that, folks, is really the wrap-up here on what we're talking about, with regards to today's chapter of Tanya. Next week, what we're going to talk about in chapter 24 is about the flip side of this. How in today's discussion, we spoke about how every positive mitzvah is an opportunity to connect with God's essence. Next week, we're going to talk about how every negative mitzvah, every sin, is an absolute rejection of God, so that the following week, in chapter 25, we can really tie it all up together in the most beautiful and meaningful way. With that, folks, we're going to conclude today's Tanya class and encourage the men to join us tonight at 8:30 p.m., Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m., for the Farbrengen, the men's Farbrengen, which is themed God, the Holocaust, and the coronavirus. So we'll look forward to seeing you tonight on Zoom. Information is posted on the men's group WhatsApps, on what's it called? The Millionaires group on WhatsApp and the Men's Club WhatsApp. Who we hope to see you there at 8:30 tonight. God, the Holocaust, and coronavirus. Thank you for joining us.